I wanted to start the timeline December 1st, 2019, because I was doing a research on the actual rollout of COVID, and it was a case of pneumonia of an unknown cause surfaced in Wuhan City. This is before, this was when it was just murmurings, and it was just sort of, we're not really sure what this is. But I was wondering, do you remember exactly where you were the first time you had heard of what turned into COVID and what your reaction was?
Yes, well, actually, like most of New Zealand, I was on summer holiday, summer break at that time. We just had the Whakaari White Island event. I've been, one of the things that's kind of kept me sane through the years and kind of, I think, helped keep the family together. I've been really rigorous about taking breaks every holidays, and we had our kind of Christmas, New Year period is kind of sacrosanct, and then we head to the South Island for a week or two, and I had that already booked out, but we had colleagues obviously back in Wellington who were following what was happening, and it wasn't actually till I got back from my summer break after Wellington anniversary weekend, and it was kind of the first thing that appeared on my desk, and I had been following what was in the news, but not really any direct communication, because we're talking at that point there was, there were maybe a couple of hundred cases in China at that point. But as soon as I got that and started talking to my colleagues, I realised, this could be something. And the year before, we'd had the measles outbreak in Auckland, and we'd been too slow out of the blocks, actually, partly to wrap around and support the Auckland region. And then, of course, the measles virus got from Auckland to Samoa, and it was tragic. I think 83 people died there, many of them young children, and there were a lot of reasons behind that. So, my boss, the Public Service Commissioner, had said to me, Ashley, the lesson is if you think something's going to be a 7 out of 10, go 10. You can always dial it back. So we went 10, and set up our coordination centre straight away and just started absolutely, tapping all our potential sources of information, all the international links and so on. So one thing I can say is right from when we thought this is going to be something, we absolutely went the full noise. Yeah.
I don't think we've introduced Libby yet. Libby is your wife,
Indeed.
Who you met in medical school. She's a doctor herself. These initial COVID conversations, are you having chats with her like, shit, this is something, Libby? Like, do you remember like the first time you talked to her about how serious this thing was, which was coming down the barrel?
I don't remember the first time I talked to her, but she will remember me waking up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat night after night, kind of literally having nightmares about COVID and just totally, it felt overwhelming. It felt, I don't know where this is going to be, going to go. Am I up for this? Why me? Why didn't I read the fine print on my contract? 1 in 100 year pandemic. It's sort of, it could happen, but you're just sort of hoping I'll get through my 5 years and then it won't happen, but it was happening. So, really early on, I think I realised, and she realised as well, as did my colleagues, this was huge, and the frightening thing, and I was frightened, and I know from listening to and talking with people who are in similar roles overseas, politicians and public servants, it was the most stressful time of our career. It was certainly for me, because you just did not know where this was going to go. And if you went back 100 years to the pandemic, the flu pandemic, yes, in a different time, because we didn't have healthcare systems and we didn't necessarily have the public health interventions, and there were other factors at play, like soldiers coming back from the war. But oh my goodness, you could imagine something that was going to be absolutely huge. So it was frightening.
That sense of gravity as to what may come, was that all playing out behind closed doors before it was, I guess, very public outside of the 6 o'clock news bulletin about this thing that was happening on the other side of the world? Did you have that level of information that you had access to, I guess, for you to brace yourself and your department to brace themselves before what was coming?
Well, we were as reliant on what was coming from international news sources and out of the WHO as everybody. And one of the things I'm proud of is that, we did our first media stand-up, I think it was the 29th of January 2020, and it was either the same day or even the day before that WHO declared it a public health emergency of international concern. Now, there was a bit of an ulterior motive. We were getting too many media inquiries for the team to deal with, so we thought we'll do a stand-up, invite everybody, answer all the questions, see, and then we'll do any follow-up questions after that. But I can absolutely hand on heart say, at those stand-ups, and if you go back and look at the earlier ones, we were saying everything we knew, and if we didn't know, we'd say, I don't know. I mean, I've never said I don't know so many times as I did in those early stand-ups. Or I'd say, I haven't got that information, but we'll get it for you. And it was a real lesson in what builds trust. And I talk about this in my leadership talks now, is people want to know not just what you know, but what you don't know, and feel assured that when you do get information, you're going to keep updating them. And so there wasn't sort of, we weren't getting intel through the Five Eyes network that was telling us something. There was, of course, speculation for a while, and it's still ongoing, about the source of the virus, and we'll probably never get to the bottom of that. But other than that, there was no kind of behind the scenes kind of covert information.
There's a real lesson in the power of I don't know, right? Because so many times in just general interactions, a mate will ask you a question. You might have a vague idea about what that is, but rather than saying, I don't actually know, you kind of pop off with some half-truth, half something that you've heard from some other source, versus just saying, I don't actually know that, but I'll try and find out and come back to you and let you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really emphasise this in the talks I'm giving around leadership, that actually it's okay not to know. And people don't expect you to know all the answers. And this is where I think we need to cut our politicians more slack, because there is no political mileage in a politician saying, I don't know. So then, of course, they sort of maybe fudge the answer, and then everyone says, you're lying, or you're not, that's just, you're just astroturfing or whatever. And even beyond that, it's I've changed my mind. I mean, you think about masks, our advice on masks. Well, I got roasted for days by the media on that. But it was just, actually, we've got new evidence. The advice has changed, therefore this is our advice. And the hardest one to do is something's gone wrong. Here's what we're going to do about it. And of course, we cut our politicians no slack to do that. It's kind of next question. I got it a few times from Mike Hosking. It is, when are you going to resign? Straight away, someone's head is looked for. Not, well, actually, things don't go right all the time. We should expect that. And it should be okay for our politicians to say, actually, this hasn't gone as it should. But the media goes straight for the failure and, the failure headline. It's a failure.
F and C's, is that what you call it?
I call them the media's favourite F-bomb and C-bomb, failure and crisis, which they do overuse. And I started to take this perspective around failure. Actually, the failure would be if we didn't review and learn and adjust. But it's not a failure if things don't go perfectly. Of course, if there's an egregious mistake, that's different. But that's seldom the case.
I don't want to rehash the whole COVID timeline. We actually have a rule whenever COVID gets brought up on the podcast, we try to sort of nip it in the butt. We're like, listeners don't want to hear COVID, but
it's a bit hard probably interviewing me.
I feel like this is the one exception where we can talk about it. But I want to really hone in on the 1 p.m. presses because, like you say, it started and then you didn't know how long it was going to go for, but it dominated not just your life, but it dominated the nation and everyone was tuned in, and it can be what I only imagine was the most stressful period of your life. Can you talk to us a little bit about what was going on inside Ashley's brain in the hours before that 1 p.m. presser each day?
Yeah, look, it was a big deal. I mean, almost as stressful as watching a Rugby World Cup final. But day in, day out, imagine that. Imagine the Ireland or South Africa game every day. So, I mean, it became clear to me quite early on, especially once I started doing those stand-ups with either the Minister or the Prime Minister, that this was kind of a key role for me. And I handed over some of my other responsibilities to other great colleagues who carried those, and that allowed me to focus on it. But, it was a big thing every day. It took hours out of my day mentally and literally preparing for it. I talk about the 10 o'clock in the morning, set my watch by my cortisol level, just going boing, up really high, the classic cortisol response. And then, I couldn't eat beforehand. And I just had a great team. So we'd go through all the information. Our comms team would have been working with the Prime Minister's or the Minister's office about, what are we going to focus on today? And we'd work up our lines. We'd go through them. I'd put my flavour on them. I'd leg it down the road to the Beehive, have an hour with the PM usually, and communication was one of her big strengths, and so she would be going through on the computer. She'd have a what you might sort of sit out. Her team would have written something up, but she'd be going through writing it out in her voice, as it were, and we'd be testing things and making sure we had, what are the latest tweets coming through, what are the reporters saying they've got some information about, so we were as well briefed as possible. But then there was this kind of ritual of going down in the lift and walking into the Beehive Theaterette on the ground floor of the Beehive, and I've described it as like walking into the Colosseum, not as it is now, like a tourist attraction, but like there's either a gladiator or a lion waiting for you. It just felt like that every day. And that's not, I'm not casting any aspersions on the political reporters, because I think actually they are fantastic at their job, and in several times when they were under a lot of criticism for whatever it was the public took exception to, which was usually things like asking the same question 4 or 5 times over. This is a part of a healthy democracy. These guys are there to hold us who are in power to account, and no more important time to do that when you're in a crisis situation and the government is asking people to do extraordinary things. But my goodness me, I'd come out of it at the end and I'd just be drenched in sweat. It would be like, if I could, I'd have a lie down.
Yeah. What would you do? What would you actually do? What would you do for the hour after you've just had a big release?
It was just the walk up the road. It was a bit of a routine. Walk up the road, get something to eat, and really just sit down and kind of let my mind and body settle, as it were, and then I could do some other work. But the whole thing was a big deal, and I guess you could say so it should have been. And I remember talking to a colleague about 20 years ago in health, and she said to me, our jobs would be easy if we didn't care. But when you care, of course, you're going through, and what I would try not to do would be re-rehearse it in my mind. So I could have, of course I'd be thinking, yep, maybe, and I'd get some feedback and say, okay, how was my answer to that question? Could I have done that a little differently? So I would be reviewing, but not rehearsing it. And I never watched, I don't think I watched 1 second of any of those stand-ups or any of the media, because it would have been too much. Yeah.
There must have been times when you'd done all this prep and research and thought, shit, I got a shit hot answer for this question, and then it never comes. And you're like, oh, it's not going to ask me about.
No, well, the trick is giving the shit hot answer even if the question doesn't come. That's the thing. Yeah, actually, the answer I'm proudest of is one with Mike Hosking, and this was in August 2020 when we had the little outbreak up here in Auckland, and we were deciding whether or not to put people who were community cases into managed isolation facilities. And Mike, in his usual kind of shock jock way, said, oh, come on, Ashley, when are you going to just round these people up? And I said, Mike, this is New Zealand. We round up sheep. We don't round up people. Nice. And the thing about Mike was it wasn't a great way to start a Thursday morning, but, he's ace at his job. He's fantastic at his job. And it's like a contest, or theatre, we were both playing our parts, and when we got to the end of it, he made it really clear to me he didn't think much of the job I'd done, but he did say, "But you turned up every time, even though you knew I was going to give you a hard time."
Is that those chats with Mike? Mike obviously has the biggest audience in New Zealand, and we've had a number of guests on who know him very well. And regardless of what you think of his politics, he is very good at what he does.
Absolutely.
How does that interaction go before that? Does he have to tell you the things he wants to talk about so you're well prepared, or is it just anything and you've got to be across everything?
Well, most of the interviews, if you've got a half-decent comms team, they will have talked with the interviewer and their team and got an idea of what they want to cover. So you can do a certain amount of preparation. Of course, you don't know how he's going to drop the questions. But some people are quite surprised when I say, well, actually, the interaction with Mike would be, I'd go on, I'd talk to his kind of producer, very nice fellow called Michael, and he'd put me through, and the routine would be Mike would say, "G'day mate, how's it going? Okay, you ready?" And then he'd say, "Okay, we'll count it in 3, 2, 1. I've got Dr. Ashley Bloomfield here again this morning. When are you going to resign, Ashley?" But then at the end it would be, "Okay, thanks mate, good as ever," and off he'd go, and then of course you couldn't control what he would say afterwards.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like a hostile interaction. It was people doing their jobs as well as they could, and that's why, for me, it was really important to always front up.
That was appointment viewing, Hosking v Bloomfield, and for the reasons you say, because you knew he was going to have a go at you, knew he was going to attack you, and I wanted to hear, whether it was you or Jacinda or Hipkins or everyone, how they defended themselves against the questioning. And sometimes you're like, that's a ridiculous thing to say, he's gone too far, but you always kept your cool Like you were always calm and measured. Like you never reacted emotionally. Were there times when you got off the line, the call finished up, you're like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, no comment. But that's the old trick, isn't it? Is if you're going to be a jerk, don't do it when other people are around. Wait till you're alone and you close the door. No, I just sort of felt it was a bit of a contest, and I absolutely knew the thing people needed most from me was to keep being calm, and that's what people remember, is because that was what was reassuring for people. Sometimes it was frustrating. But actually, in many respects, I found other journalists, particularly the RNZ journalists, because they would take longer and they would keep coming back at you and back at you. Mike would just throw another shock jock, question at you. He wouldn't necessarily keep digging. But, some of those journalists like the Lisa Owens and so on, the Morning Report journalists, they're pretty tough.
Yeah, I'd heard you named, was Lisa Owen the hardest interviewer?
Well, aside from everyone's... like the kuya of radio journalism, Kim Hill, of course, and Kim is outstanding at her job. But we've got, across the board in New Zealand, we've got great journalists in print, on radio and on TV. And I think, I just think we're well served, actually.
We had Detector Inspector Scott Beard on the podcast a while back, and he spoke around the personal development opportunities that he had in the lead up to taking his role, including public speaking and things like that. And I gather Kim Hill, you've referenced her as well, I gather she was part of the interview process for you to get the Director General of Health role. Was it an hour back and forth or an hour interview with her?
Yeah, it was quite a process, that interview process, as you would expect it to be. So there were, an hour with a couple of psychologists, then an hour being interviewed by Kim Hill on basically the healthcare system in a very realistic sort of situation with the psychologists in the room watching and observing it all. So, that was, I think, an important part of it. And, interestingly, I had done some media work before then in my roles in the ministry and as a DHB chief executive. So I had not just had the initial training, but had a chance to practice the skills. But by goodness me, it's like training for a marathon. The more you do it, the more, I guess, not so much confident, but the more skilled, I guess, and you just, it's like a set of muscles. You grow them, and then you are less phased when different situations and different questions are thrown your way.
Because in a weird way, reviewing and researching your career, it's almost like the pandemic was tailor-made for your particular skill set. You had the soft skills and empathy through your time as a junior doctor. You had the public policy knowledge through being in public health. You had international health experience through going up to the World Health Organization in Switzerland. You had the leadership and CEO skills from heading DHBs. And you had the measles outbreak just before, which was almost like a mini opportunity to test communication of public strategies to people. It's a weird combination of factors that then presented itself with this global pandemic. How boring would your job have been had all of that not happened as the Director General of Health?
Well, I always say, especially when I'm mentoring younger people coming through, I say, look, don't worry about having a 5-year plan. I've never had one of those. Never really even, maybe a couple of years ahead. But I can tell you this: if I had a 5 or a 10-year plan, I would not have had the plan to be the Director General of Health when there's a global pandemic. Let's just get that straight. So saying, when. And going back to those early days when I was waking up at 3 a.m. in the cold sweat, and I can't remember exactly what day it was, but one morning there was just a circuit breaker where I got up and I thought, actually, you're in the role, you've done you've outlined, you've done all these things. All you've got to do each day is just get up and play a straight bat to whatever comes down the pitch, and just keep being yourself, just keep doing the best you can. That's all you can do. And from that time, the waking up at 3 a.m. stopped. It didn't make it any less stressful and relentless and intense. But I guess I'm really grateful for all the training and all the life experiences I'd had. And that includes the ones I've talked about. It includes the fact that I trained as an infantry officer in the Territorial Force. And the Territorial Force commissioning course, 7 weeks in Waihuru, is incredibly tough. We started with 42 and 21 graduated. they mentally and physically push you to the limit. And so I learnt a lot about myself in my early 20s about, just how far I could be pushed and still remain, I guess, always lead self is the thing that everything is built on. And so that was what was really important for me also through the pandemic.
You certainly did get pushed. I want to bring Libby in. We part of the process, what we normally do is we reach out to friends and family and we ask for little inside lines on the guest. And we went to a few of yours, and Libby came back and said, no, actually, I want to keep our, private and public business separate, which I've totally respected and thought that's really interesting area to talk with you about it if you're open to, because while this is all going on and the stress and the sleepless nights, you're obviously taking that home with you. You can't separate that. Like, how did that impact your relationship at home with your family?
Yeah, well, my family were amazing, and Libby especially, in kind of supporting me through it. It just was invaluable, and I really couldn't have done it without them. And one of the abiding memories of the pandemic for me is actually having all 3 kids home during that first lockdown, and I was working pretty hard, and it was all uncertain, and we're doing the stand-ups every single day, but just to be able to come home and sit around the table with them all and just be, and the fact that we were all there together was such a it's kind of essential for me. I guess through my career, I've had these increasingly responsible jobs, and even being being a DHB chief executive is not for the faint-hearted. It's a big job, and being DG of health, even if there's not a pandemic, likewise. So I got pretty good at compartmentalising things, and I'm not the sort of guy that comes home and kind of just can't talk, don't want to, bring me a beer, I'm just going to put my feet up on the sofa and watch sport. I always have tried to come home and be my best self. So saying, the big thing was I was carrying the weight of this thing on, in my head and on my shoulders, day in, day out, even when we were on holiday, on the weekends, day and night. And I was trying to be my best self. I was trying to behave, but I just didn't have the headspace for much else. And
what was the jigsaw analogy? I love the jigsaw.
Yeah, the jigsaw analogy. And this came to me only when it's the day after I finished, where I suddenly realised, oh my goodness, like I've got my brain back. I can think about all these other things. And I realised it was like I'd been carrying this 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle around in my head that I was trying to assemble, but I didn't have the box with the picture on the front at the start. And every now and then, a piece would come along and I realised, oh, that one's in the wrong place. But every bit of information, every day, I was holding that picture and trying to communicate it to everybody. And as more information came along or we knew more, then the picture became clearer and clearer. But suddenly I didn't have to do that. So I think I became a lot easier to live with, And the key example here is just to have those conversations where when Libby came to me and would say, I've just got a few things I need to kind of check with you. And most of the time it would be, I'm sorry, I just haven't got the headspace to have that conversation. And her next very reasonable question would be, well, could you tell me when you would be? And I should have said, well, when I finish as DG, but it'd just be, I can't even think about that. But now, and straight away it was, well, let's sit down, have a cup of tea and talk about it. And so I think the fact that Libby put up with that, and my kids, it was quite hard for them, especially the one who was still at school. The others were a bit more anonymous in the workplace or at university. It was hard, especially when the criticism was being piled on and something hadn't gone right. And they never, ever complained once. They never said anything about it. But I know once I finished up, it was a relief for them.
You would be well placed to offer a sort of snarky retort. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to lead the country through a global pandemic. If you can just put your issue to a side for 1 second.
Just a quick, was the Bloomfield household the same as other households around that time of like a family quiz at 8 o'clock on a Friday night that you had to tune in for? Did you get the COVID experience that the rest of us had around baking different types of bread? Maybe not you specifically, but all of those things that time allowed families to have. Did your household indulge in those as well?
They did. I don't know how much bread baking went on, and I can't vouch for what happened when I wasn't there, but it felt like a gift. I have to say. And, the jigsaw puzzles, the real ones came out, board games. But it was just this, the weather was beautiful. We had that long summer that went into autumn, and I can just remember sitting out on the back steps in the sun, all of us just sitting there for an hour, and all you could hear were the pee waka waka, the fantails, and going for those walks down the street and up and short bike rides, of course, within 5 kilometres of home. But it was just, and I can remember thinking, what do we fill our days with usually? Why is it we don't have this time usually? So it was, I am pleased to say, our family did have those times, and I do remember it with great joy.
I remember that. Well, I had 3 kids under 5 during lockdown.
A bit harder for you.
No, but there would be days when I wouldn't be working and my wife wouldn't be working, and you'd have nothing to do all day. So you would go on out a family walk, or you would do things totally differently. And also some good gags. We talk about threads. We had one where I think on our thread I sent some videos of my kids playing football, and a few other dads sent theirs through. And Shay was living with his mum at the time, and he got his mum out the back of his yard, and she was doing some little drills through the cones. And there was just so much of that community goodwill going on.
Yeah. It was a good time. It was a really good time. Like it was a terrible time.
Yeah.
But it was also, in terms of that reconnection piece, was an interesting moment in time.
It was, and I think that it's really interesting to go back, and there are people all around the world. I get requests every week to be interviewed for someone's PhD, and the latest one is someone who's a student at the University of Edinburgh doing a PhD on something. And I said, sorry, I've kind of had to confine the number of interviews I do around it. But it'd be really interesting to look back at that time. But just what was the combination of things that led to such a high level of trust and unity and collective action that actually meant we nailed it. And I joke about the fact that it was a mix of kindness and looking after each other and a bit of competitiveness. It was like, we're going to go for zero. So, we're not going to go for a few. We're going to go for zero. We're going to do this better than everybody else. But it was a really interesting time, and it's also interesting how quickly we've forgotten it as well.
Yeah.
Before we jump into leadership, can I just ask one quick? How many times during that period were you left, or did you leave yourself on mute during a meeting, and someone had to, Ashley, you're on mute, Ashley, just redo that point? Or did you always manage to get yourself off mute?
Oh, definitely not. No, I was struggling just as much as everybody else.
Just wanted to check. Again, you think you're the expert in terms of making sure everything is flowing.
Yeah.
So how long we got? We've got 15 to go. Okay. I want to talk about leadership soon, but before that, I'd read that you kept a diary through this period.
That's the one thing I didn't do.
Oh, you
People
didn't?
often ask me, what's your main do you have any regrets? And I say, actually, my main regret is I didn't keep a diary. I just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. But if or when I do go back and decide to kind of write something up, all those stand-ups are on YouTube. I mean, pretty much everything I did publicly can be found. And a lot of all the decision-making papers from government are all now available. So
and a very high rating on IMDb as well for
Yeah.
your.
I know
for
it's the
for your
sort of
stand-ups.
rating Hollywood would die for.
9.3,
I know it's kind of like that's a blockbuster.
9.3, 1,800 reviews, 9.3, the 1 p.m. stand-up. It's a lot of viewing time if you go back and watch them all.